The golden cage. The champagne glass trembled imperceptibly in Victoria Blackwell's manicured fingers as she watched her husband of 20 years charm another roomful of Silicon Valley's elite. From her position by the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Marin County estate, she could see the San Francisco Bay glittering like scattered diamonds in the twilight. The view had once filled her with pride, a testament to how far they'd come from Marcus's humble beginnings as a college dropout with a half-formed idea about data analytics. Now, at 45, Victoria felt like a museum piece in her own home. The sleek, minimalist interior Marcus preferred made her feel cold, erased. Every surface was polished steel and glass, reflecting nothing but emptiness back at her. The guests moved through the space like well-dressed sharks, discussing market disruptions and venture capital rounds with predatory enthusiasm. "Darling, you look positively radiant tonight," cooed Senator Patricia Wells, appearing at Victoria's elbow with the practiced grace of a career politician. 20 years! What an achievement in today's world! Victoria smiled, the expression as carefully crafted as everything else about this anniversary celebration. "Thank you, Patricia. Marcus certainly knows how to throw a party." She gestured toward her husband, who stood at the center of the great room, like a king holding court. At 48, Marcus Blackwell remained devastatingly handsome, his silver-touched temples only adding to his authority. His latest acquisition, a promising AI startup called Neuralink, had just been announced, sending Blackwell Technologies' stock soaring to new heights. What the senator couldn't see was the ice-cold rage building in Victoria's chest, because standing just a breath too close to Marcus was Natasha Sterling, the company's 28-year-old VP of marketing. Natasha was everything Victoria had once been: young, ambitious, hungry. Her red dress clung to her athletic frame, like liquid fire, and when she laughed at Marcus's jokes, her hand lingered on his arm with unmistakable possessiveness. Victoria had known about the affair for months. The signs had been impossible to ignore. Late meetings that ran past midnight, sudden business trips to cities where Blackwell Technologies had no offices, and the way Marcus's eyes went dead whenever he looked at her. She'd hired a private investigator, discreetly, of course. The photographs James Morrison delivered had been devastatingly clear. Marcus and Natasha entering his downtown penthouse, emerging from weekend getaways in Napa, sharing intimate dinners in restaurants where they thought no one would recognize them. The crowd began to thin as the evening wore on, guests drifting toward the valet stand with promises to do lunch soon and discuss that merger opportunity. Victoria played her part perfectly, kissing cheeks and thanking everyone for celebrating with them. She was the ideal tech mogul's wife, elegant, intelligent enough to hold her own in conversation, but never threatening enough to overshadow her husband's brilliance. By 11 o'clock, only the three of them remained in the vast living room. The catering staff moved like ghosts, clearing away the remnants of celebration. Marcus loosened his tie, his face flushed with champagne and triumph. The Neuralink acquisition had positioned him perfectly for a run at the industry's top tier, the kind of power that could reshape entire markets. "What a night," he said, accepting a fresh drink from Natasha. She'd somehow procured a bottle of his favorite Macallan 25, moving through his home with the confidence of someone who already belonged there. "Did you see Henderson's face when I announced the AI integration timeline? We'll have full deployment within 18 months. Victoria set down her untouched champagne and turned to face them both. Something in her posture must have changed, because Marcus's celebratory mood faltered slightly. After 2 decades of marriage, he could still read her moods when he bothered to pay attention. "Victoria, we need to talk," he said, the words carrying and finality that made the room feel suddenly airless. Natasha stepped closer to Marcus, her chin lifting with barely concealed triumph. She'd been waiting for this moment, Victoria realized. This wasn't just an affair, it was a coup. I think it's time we all stopped pretending, Marcus continued, his voice taking on the same tone he used in hostile board meetings. This hasn't been a real marriage for years. We're living parallel lives, under the same roof, going through the motions for the cameras. It's not fair to any of us. Victoria remained silent, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. Inside, something ancient and fierce was awakening, something that remembered who she'd been before she became Mrs. Marcus Blackwell. "I'm in love with Natasha," he said, the words hitting the room like a physical blow. "I want to build something real with her, something passionate and honest." The irony wasn't lost on Victoria. Honest, from the man who'd built his empire on corporate espionage and predatory acquisition tactics. "I see," she said softly, her voice betraying nothing of the storm building inside her chest. Marcus relaxed, slightly, interpreting her calm as acceptance. He'd expected tears, pleading, perhaps even rage. He'd prepared for all of those responses. He hadn't prepared for this eerie tranquility. "My lawyers will be in touch tomorrow," he continued. "I want this to be civilized. You'll be more than comfortable. The house in Aspen, a settlement that will set you up for life. All I ask is discretion." Victoria nodded slowly, as if considering his generous offer. 20 years of her life, reduced to a real estate transaction and a non-disclosure agreement. "How very thoughtful of you both," she said finally, her voice carrying just the faintest edge of something that made Natasha shift uncomfortably. "I assume you'll want me moved out before you make any public announcements." "There's no rush," Marcus said, though his relief was obvious. "Take your time. Find somewhere you'll be happy." Victoria smiled then, a small, enigmatic expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Marcus, I intend to be very happy indeed." As she walked toward the staircase, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor, neither Marcus nor Natasha noticed the way her spine straightened with each step, or how her fingers moved to touch the simple gold locket at her throat, the one containing a photo of her late mentor, Professor Edmund Hartwell, who taught her that the most dangerous opponents were the ones who let you think you'd already won. The golden cage was finally opening, and Victoria Blackwell was ready to fly. The silent architect. The morning after Marcus's announcement, Victoria sat in her private study, a sanctuary he'd never bothered to enter, dismissing it as cluttered with old books. Surrounded by leather-bound volumes on economics and corporate strategy, she opened her laptop and began making calls that would change everything. Her first call was to Professor Edmund Hartwell, now 70 but still sharp as the day he'd taught her advanced financial modeling at Stanford. Edmund had been more than her mentor. He'd been her father figure after her parents died in a car accident during her junior year. "Victoria, my dear," his warm voice carried across the secure line from his estate in Carmel. "I was wondering when you'd finally tire of playing the decorative wife. The performance ends today, Edmund. It's time to activate everything we've built." For 15 years, using the trust fund her parents had left her, Victoria had been quietly building a shadow empire. While Marcus focused on his flashy acquisitions and public victories, she'd been purchasing strategic stakes in emerging tech companies through a network of shell corporations Edmund helped her establish. Her crown jewel was Phoenix Ventures, a holding company that now controlled significant portions of Blackwell Technologies' key suppliers and competitors. The Neuralink acquisition was predictable, Edmund mused. Marcus always goes for the shiny, new toy, without considering the infrastructure required. "I assume you've positioned us accordingly?" Victoria smiled, pulling up a complex flowchart on her screen. "Better than positioned. Remember Data Flow Solutions, the little company I had Phoenix acquire 3 months ago?" "Ah." Edmund's chuckle was rich with appreciation. "The one that handles all of Neuralink's core processing architecture? Clever girl." While Marcus celebrated his latest conquest, he'd failed to realize that Victoria now controlled the very technology that made his acquisition valuable. Dataflow's proprietary algorithms were the backbone of Neuralink's AI capabilities. Without them, Marcus had bought an expensive shell. Her second call was to James Morrison, the private investigator who'd been documenting Marcus's affair. James had become something more than a hired gun. His background in corporate intelligence made him invaluable for the larger game Victoria was playing. "I have updates on the Blackwell board situation," James reported. "Thomas Gray and Helen Frost are growing nervous about Marcus's leadership style. The Neuralink purchase stretched their credit lines dangerously thin, and some major investors are starting to ask uncomfortable questions about his personal life." Victoria had been cultivating relationships with key board members for months, positioning herself not as Marcus's bitter ex-wife, but as a concerned stakeholder with intimate knowledge of the company's vulnerabilities. Her strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Let Marcus's own arrogance create the conditions for his downfall. "What about Natasha's background?" she asked. James rustled through papers. Interesting developments there. Her previous employer, Zendex Corporation, is facing SEC investigations for market manipulation. Natasha was head of their PR division when several misleading earnings reports were published. Nothing directly traceable to her, but enough to raise red flags if it became public. Knowledge. Victoria felt a cold satisfaction settle in her chest. Natasha Sterling wasn't just Marcus's mistress. She was a liability that could destroy everything he'd built if the wrong information surfaced at the right time. Over the following weeks, Victoria played her role to perfection. She moved into a luxurious suite at the St. Regis, appearing wounded but dignified. She hired a competent but unremarkable divorce attorney named Robert Chen, someone who would negotiate reasonably but wouldn't threaten Marcus's sense of control. Meanwhile, her real legal team, the most ruthless corporate lawyers money could buy, worked in complete secrecy. Marcus, drunk on victory and Natasha's adoration, began making the exact mistakes Victoria had anticipated. He started restructuring Blackwell Technologies to give Natasha more power, promoting her to Chief Strategy Officer despite her questionable background. He took on more debt to fund ambitious expansion plans. Most critically, he announced an IPO for Neuralink, promising investors revolutionary AI capabilities he couldn't actually deliver without the technology Victoria now controlled. The engagement announcement came 6 weeks after their separation. Marcus and Natasha appeared on the cover of Forbes, painted as Silicon Valley's new power couple. The article described their modern love story and Marcus's graceful handling of his divorce. Victoria was mentioned only in passing as his supportive former spouse who had stepped aside with remarkable dignity. That evening, Victoria sat in her hotel suite reading the article while Edmund joined her via video call. On her coffee table lay the wedding invitation that had arrived that afternoon, thick cardstock with gold embossing announcing the union of Marcus Blackwell and Natasha Sterling at the exclusive Fairmont Grand Del Mar Resort in San Diego. "He's inviting me to the wedding," Victoria said, holding up the invitation. Edmund's eyes twinkled with mischief. "How perfectly narcissistic of him. I assume you'll accept." Of course, it would be rude not to celebrate such a momentous occasion. Victoria's smile was sharp as winter starlight. "Besides, I've always believed in being present for historic moments." She pulled up another document on her laptop, a detailed timeline stretching from now until the wedding date, 3 months away. Every step was precisely calculated, every contingency planned for. By the time Marcus and Natasha exchanged vows, Victoria would control not just data flow and Neuralink supporting infrastructure, but enough of Blackwell Technologies' supplier network to effectively control the entire company. The beauty of it, she explained to Edmund, is that he's doing most of the work for me. Every expansion, every ambitious promise to investors, every public declaration of his genius, it's all building toward a single moment of catastrophic overextension. Edmund raised his wineglass in a mock toast. To the art of patience, my dear. Your parents would be so proud. As Victoria closed her laptop that night, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure, intoxicating rush of playing a game where she held all the winning cards. Marcus thought he was building a dynasty with his young bride at his side. In reality, he was constructing an elaborate stage for his own destruction, with Victoria as the unseen director orchestrating every scene. The wedding couldn't come soon. Enough. Part 3. The Wedding Invitation. Marcus Blackwell stood on the terrace of his San Francisco penthouse, surveying his domain with the satisfaction of a conquering emperor. The city sparkled below him like a circuit board of ambition and power. In 3 weeks, he would marry Natasha in what the press was already calling the wedding of the decade. Every detail had been orchestrated to project strength, success, and the dawn of a new era for Blackwell Technologies. The final guest confirmations just arrived, Natasha announced, gliding onto the terrace in a silk robe that cost more than most people's cars. At 28, she moved with the predatory grace of someone who had clawed her way from a middle-class background to the heights of corporate power. Her red hair caught the morning light like flame, and her green eyes burned with ambition that matched Marcus's own. She handed him a tablet displaying the RSVP list. Senator Wells confirmed, along with the entire Blackwell board. Jonathan Pierce is flying in from London specifically for this. Having the CEO of Meridian Industries there will send exactly the right message about our expansion plans. Marcus scrolled through the names, each one representing a strategic alliance or potential business opportunity. This wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a carefully choreographed display of power that would cement his position as Silicon Valley's undisputed king. What about Victoria? He asked, though he tried to sound casual about it. Natasha's smile faltered almost imperceptibly. She accepted. I still can't believe you invited her. It's a calculated move, Marcus explained, though part of him wondered if his motivations were entirely strategic. Having her there, looking elegant and supportive, reinforces the narrative that this was an amicable separation. It makes us look magnanimous and civilized. Besides, he added with a cruel smirk, I want her to see what she lost, what I built without her. What Marcus didn't know was that Victoria had spent the morning in a very different kind of meeting. In a nondescript conference room at Phoenix Ventures' discreet offices, she sat across from Thomas Gray and Helen Frost, two of Blackwell Technologies' most influential board members. Thomas, a silver-haired veteran of 3 decades in tech, looked troubled as he reviewed the financial projections Victoria's team had prepared. These numbers are concerning, Victoria. If even half of these projections are accurate, Marcus has overextended the company dangerously. Helen Frost, the former CFO of a major aerospace contractor, was more direct. He's been making promises to investors that the company simply cannot keep. The Neuralink integration alone will require technological capabilities we don't possess. And his decision to promote that sterling woman to CSO despite her questionable background. She shook her head grimly. The Phoenix rises. The morning of the wedding dawned with California's trademark golden sunshine streaming across the manicured grounds of the Fairmont Grand Del Mar. From his suite overlooking the resort's championship golf course, Marcus Blackwell felt like a modern-day emperor preparing for his coronation. Everything was perfect. The weather, the setting, the guest list that read like a directory of American power and influence. In the bridal suite 3 floors below, Natasha Sterling examined herself in a floor-length mirror, adjusting the intricate beadwork on her custom Vera Wang gown. The dress had cost more than many people's cars, but today price was no object. She was marrying one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, and every detail had to reflect that triumph. "You look absolutely radiant," gushed her sister Monica, who was serving as maid of honor. "Like a queen." Natasha's smile was luminous with victory. At 28, she had achieved what women twice her age could only dream of, not just landing a billionaire, but doing so while maintaining her own career trajectory. As Chief Strategy Officer of Blackwell Technologies, she would wield real power alongside her new husband. Miles away in her suite at the St. Regis, Victoria Blackwell was making her own final preparations. Her outfit had been chosen with the precision of a military strategist. A Armani suit in deep sapphire blue that brought out her eyes, paired with her grandmother's pearl necklace and matching earrings, heirloom pieces that spoke of old money and established power. She looked like what she was, a woman who belonged in boardrooms and on the covers of Forbes. Her phone buzzed with a final message from Edmund. "All pieces in position. Data flow board convenes at 9 a.m. tomorrow. SEC filing will be released at market open Monday. Break a leg, my dear." As guests began arriving at the resort, the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. This wasn't just a wedding, it was a carefully choreographed display of power and influence. Senator Patricia Wells mingled with venture capitalists, tech CEOs, exchanged insights with hedge fund managers. Business journalists from major publications discreetly documented the guest list, already crafting stories about Silicon Valley's newest power couple. Jonathan Pierce, the British CEO of Meridian Industries, found himself in conversation with Thomas Gray and Helen Frost near the champagne fountain. "Quite the gathering," Pierce observed, "though I must say I'm curious about some of Blackwell Technology's recent strategic decisions. The Neuralink acquisition seems ambitious." Thomas and Helen exchanged meaningful glances. Victoria's morning meeting had planted seeds of doubt that were already beginning to sprout. At precisely 3:30 p.m., guests began taking their seats for the ceremony. The setting was breathtaking. White chairs arranged in perfect rows facing a floral arch that framed the Pacific Ocean beyond. A string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as distinguished guests settled into their places. Then, at 3:45 p.m., a murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. A sleek black Mercedes had pulled up to the resort's main entrance, and stepping out was Victoria Blackwell. She looked nothing like the defeated ex-wife many had expected to see. Instead, she radiated quiet authority and unshakable confidence. She moved through the crowd with the poise of someone who belonged there, not as Marcus's cast-off, but as a power player in her own right. She nodded politely to familiar faces, exchanged brief pleasantries with board members, and took her seat, in the 4th row, with the bearing of someone attending a business merger rather than a wedding. Marcus, waiting at the altar, felt his confidence waver for the first time all day. Victoria's presence was unsettling in ways he couldn't articulate. She looked dangerous, not broken or bitter, but strategically positioned, like a chess piece that had just moved into an unexpected position. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Natasha walked down the aisle, looking like a fairy tale princess, her train flowing behind her like liquid silk. Marcus's voice was strong and confident as he recited his vows, though his eyes occasionally drifted to Victoria's unreadable expression. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Marcus kissed his new bride with theatrical passion, while photographers captured every moment. This was his victory lap, his public declaration that he had won, completely and utterly. The reception in the resort's grand ballroom was a masterpiece of luxury and excess. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables adorned with thousands of white roses. The menu featured delicacies flown in from around the world, paired with wines from Marcus's personal collection. A jazz quartet played sophisticated background music as guests mingled and networked. Victoria found herself at a table with several distinguished older gentlemen. Richard Kane, the veteran business journalist from the Wall Street Journal, Lord Pemberton, a major British investor, and Dr. Franklin Morse, a former Federal Reserve chairman. They treated her not as Marcus's discarded wife, but as someone whose opinions carried weight. "I must say, Victoria," Lord Pemberton remarked, "you're handling this situation with remarkable grace. Not many people could attend their ex-spouse's wedding with such dignity." Victoria's smile was enigmatic. "Marcus and I shared 20 years together. I want him to be happy, and Natasha is exactly what he deserves." The carefully chosen words carried multiple meanings, and Richard Kane's journalist instincts immediately picked up on the subtle implications. As the evening progressed, Marcus took the microphone for the traditional groom's speech. Standing in a spotlight with Natasha glowing beside him, he thanked their guests and spoke eloquently about love, partnership, and building a future together. Then, in a moment of supreme arrogance, he made a fateful decision. "I also want to acknowledge my former wife, Victoria, who is here with us tonight," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "Our marriage may have ended, but I'll always be grateful for the role she played in my early success. Her presence here today shows the maturity and grace with which we've both handled our transition to new chapters in our lives." The words were calculated to put Victoria in her place, the helpful ex-wife who had gracefully stepped aside for the younger, more dynamic woman. Scattered applause followed, though many guests looked uncomfortable with the display. But then Rebecca Cross, the wedding planner, made a decision that would change everything. Perhaps trying to smooth over the awkward moment, or maybe genuinely believing it would add a nice touch to the festivities, she stepped forward and took the microphone. "That was beautiful, Marcus," she said, her voice slightly trembling with nerves. "And Victoria, you look absolutely lovely tonight. I wonder, would you like to say a few words, perhaps offer some wishes for the happy couple?" A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom. This was unprecedented, the ex-wife giving a toast at her former husband's wedding. Natasha's face went white with shock and fury. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, but Victoria didn't look surprised at all. She looked ready. Rising from her seat with fluid grace, she smiled warmly at Rebecca. "How thoughtful of you to ask. I'd be delighted." As Victoria walked toward the microphone, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, every person in that opulent ballroom held their breath. The moment felt charged with possibility and danger, like the air before a thunderstorm. Marcus's empire was about to discover that some phoenixes don't just rise from ashes, they create the fire that burns everything. Down, Part 5. Checkmate. Victoria Blackwell took the microphone with the poise of someone who had been waiting her entire life for this moment. The grand ballroom fell into absolute silence. 300 of the most powerful people in America watching. A woman who was supposed to be defeated and discarded, now commanding the stage at her replacement's wedding. She surveyed the room with calm confidence, her gaze moving from the business titans to the politicians, from the venture capitalists to the journalists who were already sensing that they might be witnessing something extraordinary. Her eyes finally settled on Marcus and Natasha, frozen in their spotlight, like deer caught in headlights. "Thank you, Rebecca, for this unexpected opportunity," Victoria began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's perfect acoustics. And thank you all for being here to celebrate Marcus and Natasha on their special day." She paused, allowing a warm smile to cross her features. Several guests relaxed slightly, expecting the usual gracious platitudes of a civilized divorce. 20 years, she continued thoughtfully. That's how long Marcus and I were partners in marriage and in building what became Blackwell Technologies. I had the privilege of watching him grow from an ambitious young man with big dreams into the powerful CEO you all know today. Marcus began to relax. This was going better than he'd feared. Victoria was staying on script, the grateful ex-wife acknowledging his success while gracefully stepping aside. During those 20 years, I learned so much about business, about power, and about the difference between what appears to be and what actually is. Victoria's voice took on a subtle edge that made Richard Kane straighten in his seat, his journalist instinct suddenly alert. The word surface hung in the air. Lee,